Alice in Wonderland is probably one of the most influential stories ever written. Since its publishing in 1865, it has been adapted into every kind of medium imaginable. But like most things that evolve the subconscious and dreamlike lands, the world of Wonderland became the basis for a more horror-oriented concept in the PC game American McGee's Alice. I was first exposed to this game through one of my cousins, who when I was younger I would watch play games when at their house. One of those being some kind of Alice in Wonderland game that I distinctly remember having a dark and gritty tone to it that I hadn't quite seen in games yet. The hazy image stuck in my mind for the next however many years, until I was finally able to identify what I believed the game to be. Alice Madness Returns. And, when I bought the game on the Xbox 360, it came with a downloadable copy of the original game. I played it and liked it, so that's why I'm doing this now. It was released for PC on December the 6th, 2000, and was developed by Rogue Entertainment, published by EA, and designed and directed by American McGee, who had previously worked at id Software on games like Doom 2 and the first two Quake games. The game received an overwhelmingly positive reception upon its release, with high critical scores all across the board. A port for the PS2 was planned for release in 2001, but it was eventually cancelled, which caused EA to close down Rogue Entertainment, which was one of the many things that made McGee leave EA. So, what is American McGee's Alice all about? Does it still hold up like it did 20 years ago? How does it compare to the modern games on the market? Let's find out, shall we? But before we get into it, I just want to preface the rest of this video by saying that the console version of American McGee's Alice is apparently the remastered version. Basically, some stuff was just changed from the original PC version. So if you play the original and you notice any differences, that's why, because it's a different version. Upon opening the game, the first thing you'll see after the title screen is this rather unsettling menu. I guess this is just a little mood maker, a little snippet of what the game is going to be like from here. Also, if you go into the settings menu, you can find Alice chilling out next to a cranial anatomy chart, presumably to show which parts of the brain are responsible for the control and visual changes, which is a nice touch. The game properly begins with a CG cutscene, which for a game from 2000 looks pretty good. The story is that our protagonist, Alice Liddell, is awoken from a dream of Wonderland by her cat knocking over a gas lamp, causing her house to begin to burn down. Well, I'm glad this went from 0 to 100 in a few seconds. She manages to wake up and escape in time, but her parents are killed and Alice is left with both physical and psychological damage. We then see her years later in a catatonic state in Rutledge Asylum, where the doctors have been unable to get her to respond. They give Alice her old plush of the White Rabbit, and it pulls her back into Wonderland when it speaks to her. You know, as toys tend to do. Whilst drawing upon elements of horror games like family deaths and asylums, this opening also has a clear element of whimsy to it, like with all the objects that are shown falling, that make it clear that this game will still be tied to the original ideas of Alice in Wonderland. After the opening cutscene, the first thing you see is a map, with only one piece of it filled, with the promise of many more as the game goes on. I've never seen anything like this in a game since, which is odd because a map that slowly unfolds as the game progresses is a good way to build up anticipation for what might come next. And as silly as it sounds, it adds another layer of satisfaction as the map slowly becomes completed. Anyways, Alice falls down into a small cavern where she meets what looks to be a shriveled up white rabbit and a famished Cheshire cat, where Alice is instructed to do what else but follow the white rabbit. Alice controls well as her running and jumping are not cumbersome at all, although this does result in Alice feeling weightless, meaning that she can be easily thrown off of course by environmental hazards and enemy attacks. Alice also does have tank controls, meaning that jumping is a complete joke, as turning is practically impossible whilst doing so. The controls aren't too much of a hindrance, but they do make some parts more cumbersome than they should be. And it's also immediately clear that this game has a pretty incredible atmosphere and environmental style. Although this game has an overall gloomy mood, the areas are hardly ever dull, and use very vibrant lighting and each bursting with personality. In this first area here, there are a wider range of reds, oranges, yellows, blues and greens everywhere, which complements the twisted and gothic landscape whilst also making everything look lively. Every area in the game is like this, in that they're all incredibly warped and twisted, but everything is still colourful and vibrant, with the exception of the Vale of Tears and the Wonderland Woods, which are overwhelmingly filled with grey and brown, and because of their more open level design, instead of the very enclosed claustrophobic atmospheres everywhere else, the game's low draw distance makes the atmosphere look even blander and worse to look at. And since we're on the subject of the Wonderland Woods, let's just get it out the way by saying it is the worst and most frustrating area of the whole game. It's terrible to look at, everything looks lifeless and uninteresting, and it fails to convey the feeling that Alice is incredibly small. Instead, it just feels like everything around her is giant, which would be an abnormal conclusion in any other game, but in Wonderland, a giant forest just seems like the natural next step. It was only until the Mad Hatter stamps on the White Rabbit around halfway through the area that I actually realised I was the small one, instead of him being the giant one. This is actually one of the best scenes in the whole area, by the way, where Alice mourns for the White Rabbit, and it shows some good insight into her character. Well, I would have been able to take it seriously if I didn't think the rabbit looked so funny or flattened like that. I don't know if it's his face, how completely two-dimensional he is, or his pose, but something about it just makes me crack up. But the absolute worst offence of the woods is the Fungal Forest level, which is quite possibly one of the hardest and most unfair sections of any game I've ever played. This wasn't helped by my low health and meta essence upon entering the level. Wait, I've just realised now I haven't explained health and meta essence yet. Probably should have done that by now. So, you see these two bars on the side of the screen? Well, they're both counters for Alice's health and meta essence. Meta essence being basically just magic. The red bar is called her level of sanity, whilst the blue bar is called her strength of will. All the weapons in the game each have 2 attacks, most of which require some amount of meta essence in order to use them, making it extremely important to collect the crystals of meta essence that can be either found just around the world or picked up from killing enemies. Anyways, back to the Fungal Forest. This section was extremely difficult, mainly due to how many enemies were placed in just this first space. It is completely packed with these killer mushrooms, who have an incredibly strong breathing attack that can draw Alice in and deal massive damage if they manage to get to her. So it's difficult enough to get past them, but it's even harder when you realise right after that there are these Napoleonic soldier ants that have incredibly long range with their rifles and bayonets, which combined with this annoying crawler and the terrain makes it even more difficult than it's worth to just get to a cave where you can refuel your health. Okay, so moving on from a part of the game that's frustrating, let's move on to something that's both frantic and fun: the combat. Throughout the course of the game, you can find 10 different weapons that, as stated earlier, each have 2 attacks that have vastly different styles of play. They range from a croquet mallet that can both electrocute people and hit croquet balls for incredible damage, a pair of dice that can summon 3 types of fiends to assist in combat, to a blunderbuss that drains all your meta essence once used. In situations where you're able to, it is a blast just to be able to experiment with your entire arsenal to see what everything can do. Combat in this game, at its best, is the best possible madness, with plenty of variation in both the enemies and the weapons that make every encounter feel unique and interesting. And while we're on the subject of encounters, let's talk about the bosses. The game has 7 in total, and the vast majority of them are either not much to talk about, or they're just pretty frustrating. The Duchess in particular exemplifies this, as she is the worst boss in the whole game. In her arena, you get the Jack Bomb, a jack-in-the-box that can explode and shoot fire, obviously suggesting that you're meant to kill the Duchess with it. But the problem is, both the Jack Bomb's attacks have limited range, and they can take some time to activate from when it's thrown, so the fight essentially devolves into trying to lure the Duchess into the explosion or the fire to hurt her. And if that's not bad enough, most other attacks don't work against her, as she teleports away unharmed, and although sometimes melee attacks can get through to her, the Jack Bomb's attacks are pretty much mandatory for the fight. But it's not as if you'd want to go near her, as if you get close enough, the Duchess picks up Alice and begins to bite into her for quite a bit of damage. And if you're really lucky, you could get caught in a loop of getting thrown to the ceiling and bouncing back down so she can do the same attack over and over until you die. Or you could have the camera phase inside the Duchess's face for some nightmare material. Oh, and did I mention that she throws piglet bombs and can shoot massive spurts of pepper from a giant pepper grinder? Because she could do that. The boss with the most build-up has to be the Jabberwock. After travelling through the land of fire and brimstone, you end up at the top of a volcano with a nice looking home situated on top of it. If you haven't guessed it already, this is Alice's old home, and it's only made more clear by what he says once inside.
Your family was expecting you to come to them, weren't they? Perhaps they thought you might warn them of the danger, being close to the source as you were. But they waited in vain, didn't they? And died for their trouble.
We were all asleep. It was an accident.
Selfish, misbegotten, and unnatural child. You smelled the smoke, but you were in dreamland taking tea with your friends. You couldn't be bothered. You're the is protected and spared, while your family upstairs roasted in an inferno of incredible horror.
And if the symbolism wasn't strong enough already, you fight the Jabberwock inside the burning remains of Alice's home. But fortunately, I hit him like twice, and then I think he fell off the side of the arena, or he just completely disappeared, and then the cutscene suddenly started like a few minutes later, and the fight was just over. So that was nice. And this has just reminded me, I've gone like 10 plus minutes into this video, and I haven't even talked about what it is you're supposed to be doing in this game. After falling into the village of the doomed, Alice sees the white rabbit become small and run through a door, meaning she has to find a way to follow him. Upon hearing from the torch gnomes through their funny voices,
"Stir up no trouble, stranger. The Red Queen's agents are ruthless,"
that there's a gnome inside a mine who could help her. The gnome instructs Alice to get a key from the card guards so that they can get inside the Fortress of Doors, which they fly to on the Elder Gnome's airship. He tells Alice of a school that has the ingredients to make the potion that will make Alice smaller. From a book in the school's library, Alice and the Elder Gnome learn of the ingredients they need, and they both go on a short fetch quest to collect them. With the potion mixed, Alice leaps off the telescope in the school's observatory into the Vale of Tears. And yes, I promise this is on the course to find the White Rabbit. From the Vale of Tears is the Wonderland Woods, where the rabbit plans on taking Alice to Caterpillar, who can explain everything to her. But before they're able to get any far, he's crushed under the Mad Hatter's foot, leaving Alice guilt-ridden and in tears. She does find her way to Caterpillar, who explains that Alice's guilt has caused this change in Wonderland, and that she needs to kill the Red Queen in order to save both herself and Wonderland. But in order to do so, she needs to return to her original height. So Caterpillar tells Alice about a mushroom in the Fungal Forest that will return her to normal. Upon growing to a normal size, Alice finds the first piece of the Jabberwock's eye staff in the Caterpillar's plot, which is a weapon of unmatched power that is needed to destroy the Queen's Sentinel, the Jabberwock, and to break down the barrier to the Queen's Castle in Queensland. The rest of the game follows Alice's search for the two other pieces of the Eye Staff, which leads Alice to encounter the warring chess pieces in the Looking Glass Land, the Mad Hatter and the Tweedles in the Hatter's Domain, the Jabberwock in the Land of Fire and Brimstone, and the full brunt of the Red Queen's army in the Queen of Hearts Land. One of the biggest highlights of the whole game is the various different areas, my favourite of these being the Looking Glass Land. I adore the chess theming and the monochrome colouring. It's by far the most aesthetically pleasing area to me. I also love the two puzzles where Alice turns into chess pieces and navigates through obstacle courses with the movement restrictions of the chess piece. This mechanic is super interesting and unique, and it's a crime that they were only used twice in the game. It was also the first area where I was able to properly experiment with weapons, which made the experience a lot more enjoyable than it had been previously. Even the boss at the end of the area is fun. Another area I found really interesting was the outside portion of the Fortress of Doors. So for some context, when I started playing this game for this video, I didn't know that the weapons had 2 attacks each. Yeah, surprise surprise, it never occurred to me to press the left trigger for the alternate attack. And for some reason I never thought to look in the controls menu, as I had played the first few sections of the game like last year and I had no problem with them then, so I had no idea I would need to look in the controls menu. And not knowing that fact made those opening sections of the fortress hundreds of times more difficult than they're worth. From the moment you drop in, the outer wall is an assortment of fragmented rooms filled with these things called boo germs, who populate the outer zones for the sole purpose of flinging you off during platform sections, pushing you into these pits, and making you wonder why you even bothered picking up a controller in the first place. And with the feeble attacks of a melee swing and chucking low damaging cards one at a time, you can imagine these parts were rather tricky. None encapsulates my experience better than this first room, with the simple aim of getting to the top floor across the room via this rotating bridge. But the problem comes from the fact that my trying to kill both the Boojums was futile, because although one is perfectly killable, the fact that there is only one heart to replenish your health and meta essence, with the second one being dropped from the Boojum's death, it is doubtful that the playing cards and Vorpal Blade will be enough. Anyways, this resulted in a constant cycle of just trying to jump over whilst ignoring the Boojum. But as previously alluded to, they have this habit of screeching Alice off any platform in range, which is pretty wide by the way, which makes it harder to walk on a narrow path that requires a jump at the end. This made it even luckier that the Boojum pushed me over to the end so I could quickly get through. The sections of the Fortress of Doors inside the school are more pleasant than those outside, especially the library portion, which you visit twice before going up to the observatory. Aside from the fact that I just like the library visual style, it's one of the most pleasant parts of the game because it's just completely devoid of the chaos in the rest of Wonderland. The sky blocks reflects just tranquility, as it's just a normal starry sky with no wormholes or shatters in it of any kind. And it has the Cheshire Cat as the moon, which is always an essential detail. The last few parts of the game before getting to the Red Queen are also pretty interesting. For example, there was something I would have never expected to be anywhere near this game. some kind of epic fight scene between the Jabberwock and the Griffin, like it's out of an anime, especially with all these speed lines. As for the rest of Queensland, there's not that much to say, other than for most of the inside portions. I got the sense I was roaming around in Alice's brain or something. Maybe it was all the flesh over the walls, or maybe it was something about the grasshopper tea, which is only found in this one really enclosed area and causes Alice to turn into an absolutely horrifying green creature, completed with dead black eyes and wings, that increases her speed up to, I don't know, about 7 million%. And although my jump distance became amazing as a result, aiming became a thing of the past, so I just hid in a corner until it went away. Every location in the game has a design theme like this, that just sticks out in your mind. With the Vale of Tears, it's the colour grey. With Behind the Looking Glass, it's this weird smile overlay. And with the Queen of Hearts land, it's these clockwork gears and these steampunk vents. Whilst not every location in the game is fun, they're all certainly different and unique in their own way and bring something new to the game overall. Oh, and something really interesting to talk about in the game that isn't even inside my copy. The manual, more specifically the 19-page casebook from the perspective of someone who the wiki calls Dr. Hieronymus Q. Wilson, I think I'm pronouncing that right, who writes down accounts of his encounters with Alice at Rutledge Asylum. It shows Alice's various interactions with the other workers at the asylum, and some of the things she did in her comatose state before the game, and how she reacted whilst on her mental journey through Wonderland. Some of those things she did included drawing pictures of the Cheshire Cat, the Jack Bomb, the White Rabbit, the fight between the chess pieces in the Looking Glass Land, and landscapes of the school and the Fungal Forest. It's only a short read, but I would recommend checking it out, as it adds a whole new perspective on the game. I'll leave a link to it in the description below if you don't happen to own the original manual. I think games nowadays should use their manuals like this, because most modern releases either don't bother including them, or they're just a single page and the most information they include about the game are the controls. What happened to these things? But here we are. To finish off the video, let's look at the final boss, the Red Queen. But I think there's something a bit off about her. Maybe it's the lack of any face, or maybe it's the tentacles that have been present all the way throughout the game. The best way to beat this first phase of the fight is to hide behind the two pillars at the back and constantly collect the respawning meta essence in order to continuously shoot her with the ice staff. And make sure to always step away from these sparkles, especially the orange ones, because that means the Queen is drawing you in for an attack. Fortunately, you can attack her with the Vorpal Blade during that time. And just when you thought the Queen is dead, she slithered back into the throne and came back as some kind of nightmare creature, made up of this skeleton head, zombie head, the Hatter's head, and then Alice's head. Her speech to Alice is really nice, as it perfectly illustrates her character's internal conflict all throughout the game. Here, have a listen.
This realm is for grown-ups.
Raw, well-ordered, ruthless, careening on the jagged edge of reality. Self-pitying dreamers are not wanted here. They cannot survive here.
But Alice musters up the will to fight on, for both herself and for Wonderland. This final fight's atmosphere is incredible. It reminds me of the final Baby Bowser fight from the original Yoshi's Island, or the night on Bald Mountain, I guess. Although the Queen looks pretty terrifying and is the final boss of the game, I'm pleased to say that this boss is not annoying nor maddeningly difficult, making it a fun yet challenging end to the game. In fact, it's probably my favourite boss in the game. Whilst it does have a pretty simple concept requiring you to jump around on these platforms whilst hitting the Queen with anything that can reach her, looking for these hearts that respawn periodically in order to replenish any lost health and meta essence. Don't think this is a cakewalk encounter, because the Queen can dispense quite a hefty amount of damage both from her stomach cannon and her Jabberwock-headed tentacle. But after enough shots with the ice staff, the Queen goes down at last. Fleshy chunks for all. But, oh god, the last cutscene, what happened? I'm not sure if it was the compression or the upscaling in the screen size, but it just doesn't look right. Especially since the opening cutscene turned out so well. It makes it even worse that this cutscene is kind of important because it shows the ending of the game. But regardless, Wonderland is restored to its old beautiful state, everyone comes back to life, and Alice leaves Rutledge Asylum with her old bug, a black cat, and a smile on her face, ready to meet the brighter future out in the sun. And ending on that happy note, that was American McGee's Alice. So, has the game held up well? Does it still hold up even after 20 years? In most cases, I think it does. Don't get me wrong, I've made it perfectly clear throughout this video that some points of the game are absolutely frustrating. But when this game is good, it is good. Combat is fun and feels good to do. Wonderland is really nice to travel through, with the pre-rendered extending skyboxes adding a lot to the dreamlike atmosphere, and pretty much all of the skyboxes look beautiful. The graphics don't look half bad either, and the Cheshire Cat might just be one of my favourite guide characters in any game.
Doors have locks. Locks need keys, which you don't have. Let's hope the doors are open.
And if not, there may be more than one way to skin a cat, if you'll pardon the expression.
Most unpleasant metaphor. Please avoid it in future.
But the best part of the whole game for me is easily the story. Not only was this game praised as one of the first for incorporating a respectful and realistic portrayal of mental health issues, and it's told with such grace and care that it really feels like the developers had felt the things they put into it. And all of this, I think, is what makes it so powerful and really makes you invested in it. You want to see Alice succeed, and in the end you're happy that she can finally leave Rutledge Asylum with her head held high. And as a possible interpretation for the story, the idea of Alice's trauma as a result of her family's tragedy could very well be seen as a metaphor for any kind of pain or trauma that any person could feel or experience, with the house fire just being a painful experience that's completely engulfing, which makes the game feel even more grounded and realistic once you look at it from that point. Alice's journey through Wonderland to save both it and herself is a journey about self-reflection and self-betterment, which I think is something most people will go through in their lives, and it shows that that kind of journey can lead to a happy ending. Despite its flaws, I would definitely recommend anyone playing American McGee's Alice if you'd enjoy a fun single-player adventure, either on the console port or the PC original. And if you want to support American McGee and the stuff he's been doing recently, you can go subscribe to his YouTube and Twitch channels where he posts development updates on his new projects and the other stuff that he gets up to, as well as following him on Twitter and Instagram. He also has a Patreon for his upcoming project, Alice Asylum, so if you'd be interested in any of that kind of stuff, you can find all of them linked in the description. Oh, and the Cheshire Cat saying how the Mad Hatter was
Quick as Mercury and mad from it.
is cool because in the Victorian age, when the game is set, hatters, or milliners, use mercuric nitrate in order to soften the felt on fur to make constructing the hat easier. Long-term exposure to this compound can cause things like psychosis, tremors, and rapid emotional changes, which is where the phrase man as a hatter came from. I couldn't really fit this anywhere else into the video, but I really wanted to talk about it because it's an interesting piece of history. Okay, bye now!